Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Today we are back in War Thunder, and I'm going to be talking about the gun stabilizer. Now, I didn't want to talk about the gun stabilizer before it was in the game, because there have been a lot of mechanics which have been added to the game which haven't really made that much of a difference, and I wasn't sure if the gun stabilizer was going to be one of them or not. But I am happy to report, in my opinion, I think the gun stabilizer makes a massive difference, especially at certain BRs where certain tanks were lacking, and we'll go through them. So what is the gun stabilizer? So there is a Devblog on the gun stabilizer, the link for it will be in the description, and also there will be a link to the changelog where it is listed all of the tanks which have the gun stabilizer, but I will read it for you as well. The gun stabilizer is a system that improves the tank gun's aim at the target and stabilizes its aim, even when the hull vibrates during movement, which allows it to perform effective aimed fire during vehicle movement or when temporarily stopped. So reaction time and accuracy between target detection and effective hit draw the line between life and death in tank warfare. Currently, a stabilizer on specific tanks is simulated with a generic high vertical guidance, elevation, speed on the gun, which, of course, makes firing on the move or after a short stop easier, but still this does not provide a real simulation of stabilizer and fire control systems. After the introduction of the accurate stabilizer simulation, the vertical guidance speed on specifically equipped vehicles will be reduced to real-life values. This new feature will increase realism on machines historically equipped with a gun stabilization system. The stabilization system for tank guns will be enabled by default for all armored vehicles on where such systems were historically installed. For tanks with the ability to aim the gun using a lever, by default, the gun will aim as before. With the help of the aiming mechanism, the button to enable the stabilizer on such tanks will unlock the gun and enable stabilization mode. So, basically, you have a stabilizer on some tanks which steadies the gun while you're moving. Apart from if you're over certain speeds, you'll have to check on the tank itself. And also, it just basically means that if you hit bumps and stuff like that, the gun will not go all over the place. It will not rear its ugly head up and down, and also you don't need a modification to research it, which is actually something which is kind of odd when we come for it, because every other add-on, whether it be optics for later stage tier 5 tanks, whether it be FPE or parts, all of them have been modifications you have to actually get through research. So it is nice to have a modification which you don't have to research. It comes standard on the tank. It is nice to have that. It would be nice if parts and FPE were also standard, but unfortunately they're not. So it's still nice to get something which is new and you don't have to research it. Something that is also great is the fact that it makes the game that little bit more realistic. Now, with a lot of the vehicles that were added in 1.67, I felt like we are going away from realism. There was a lot of ridiculous vehicles added. When you look at the Sturmpanzer, the FV4005, general stuff like that, even like the Ho-Ro, you have these big donkey guns which were added to the game, which generally aren't used for their specific purpose, even if they were properly used at all. Generally, a lot of these guns, if you look at the Sherman 105, the Ho-Ro, the Sturmpanzer, they would generally be anti-infantry, anti-structure guns. Whereas in-game, obviously you can't really do that. There are some structures you can take out, but there are definitely no infantry you can kill. So we were heading towards a direction where we were getting some interesting vehicles, but they were being used in very odd ways. We also see that with the 88 flak truck, the new 29K, where it's not very built towards an anti-aircraft machine, but much more a tank destroyer. the realism aspect was kind of getting, find a way. So it is nice to get something like this, which adds a bit more back. And also, it means that there are certain other ideas which are also now come to the forefront after now the stabilizer is in game. So we have stuff like smoke, we have the fact that a lot of tanks in the game right now actually have areas where you would be able to fire smoke grenades or maybe even smoke shells. There was a video on the Reddit of, I can't remember what vehicle it was, it might have been a BT-7 or something like that, where it actually fired a smoke shell from its gun, showing that it is possible to do in the game. So, we have stuff like that coming. When we also look at realism, maybe eventually, I really doubt it though, because this would screw over quite a lot of vehicles, maybe unfairly, would be realistic radios. Realistic optics, very realistic optics. I understand now that we have some semi-realistic optics, especially when it comes to late tier vehicles, but maybe most of Russian tanks shouldn't have a radio. They shouldn't be able to communicate with teammates. Do you realize how that would be realistic, but maybe it wouldn't fit in the game too well? So I'm not sure about stuff like that, but once again, it would definitely make it more realistic, and for me, that's really good. So let's go on to the gun stabilizer. So as I said before, I wasn't sure if it was going to have a big impact on the game. I saw their little video that they showed, and they showed the Chieftain. And I generally thought most of the vehicles with a gun stabilizer would be facing other vehicles which also had a gun stabilizer, because most tanks post World War II had gun stabilizers in one form or another, but there weren't many during World War II that did. There was a bunch of Shermans. As I said, you can look at the changelog. The Americans loved it. They have it on the Sheridan, the M60A1, the Stuarts, the Shermans, and the Jumbos, and even the Chaffee. So they loved the damn thing. For the British tanks, we have basically post-war stuff. Conqueror, Falcon, Chieftain, and both Centurions, apart from the Mark 1. The Mark 1 did not have a stabilizer. Same with Japan. Apart from the American vehicles, we have the Type 74 and the STB-1, which are both post-war. And the USSR, the PT-76, 906, T-10M, T-62Z, Su-23-4, all post-war. And then the Leopard and the Flak Panzer Gepard for Germany. So I thought the majority of the time, this was before the changelog came out, generally vehicles that faced each other would all have gun stabilizers, and the majority of them do. If you look at top tier battles right now, what you are looking at is main battle tanks, mainly medium tanks fighting each other. Leopards fighting Chieftains, fighting M60s, fighting T62s, T62s, and fighting Type 74s. And then you throw in the odd T10M, you throw in maybe the odd Conqueror or the M103, but generally that is your lineup. You're going to start off with a medium tank to start with, and all of those tanks that I just listed have the weapon stabilizer. So I didn't think it would be that very effective at very high tiers, where I thought they would be the only ones which had a gun stabilizer. So I didn't really think it was going to do anything. If everybody has a system where a weapon is stabilized, then nobody really benefits. It only really comes down to speed, and if you are accurate on the move, which is, it can kind of be a bit dodgy. But when we go into the lower tiers, even tier 4, when we look at the Centurion Mark III, or the Shermans, the 76 Shermans, which only have a single plane one in the vertical, but that's mainly where a lot of your bumps and grinds come from in the match. It has significantly increased the efficiency and how good the tanks are, because most of the vehicles that they fight do not have these. The classic example for me that I can bring up is the Centurion Mark III. It sits at 6'3", I believe. 6'3", or 6'7", probably 6'3". And it fights mainly Tiger IIs, because generally the British and the Americans get teamed up to either face the Russians or the Germans. So if you're facing the Germans, you are generally facing the Tiger IIH, the RU-251, and very similar vehicles like that. Maybe even the Panther II if you get brought up a little tier. And then the 105 Tiger as well. And then if you face the Russians, you get stuff like the T-44, the IS-2, the IS-2 Mod 44, stuff like that you fight against. Now all of these vehicles do not have the gun stabilizer, and what I noticed is, in that initial engagement, where the first shot generally makes a large difference, especially if you're playing a British vehicle with Sabo, and you have to get that gunner dead straight away so you can start working on the tank, start working on its components, it gives you an extra 1 or 2 seconds before the enemy can shoot at you. So what used to happen is that a Centurion would be bobbing along, a Tiger II would also be bobbing along at the same time, and maybe you see each other at the same time, you brake, you try and steady your gun, and you both fire. Now this is a 50-50 chance on who has a better gun elevator and a horizontal drive. So if you don't have those modifications done, you're pretty much dead. Now the horizontal drive on the Tiger is pretty slow, but the is quite quick, but the vertical drive is quite slow. So it used to be about a 50-50 if you get the shot off or not. Now it is the case where the Centurion Mark III will 90% of the time get the first shot off. If both enemies see each other at the same time, or nearly the same time, and they both brake, or one of them has to brake, the Centurion has a massive advantage. Because of that 1 or 2 second period where you brake and you steady the gun. Because the gun is already steadied for you. You do not have to wait for the gun to move itself into position after it's been bobbing up and down while you're moving. So that gives you quite a large advantage, because as I see tank battles, generally what will happen is that whoever gets the first shot off has a massive advantage. When it used to be the Tiger II, which was sat at 6'7", and there was nothing really to compete against it, this was a time before the T-29, before the IS-6, before, what else? Maybe the Cent Mark 10 for the British. Or maybe after the Carnarvon was nerfed with its armor. What would happen is the Tiger II would rule the roost, because it had the advantage of armor, and also the fact that it had that 50-50 chance of getting the first shot off. So even if you hit the first shot, maybe you bounced. Maybe it just decided not to go through. But now, if you miss that first shot, you still have maybe a second where you have an extra second where, first of all, if you want to, you can more accurately place your shot so you're not as all over the place, or you can use that to try and get away. And with the Centurion Mark III, Mark 10, stuff like that, you actually have a reverse gear, which is kind of nice. So, you know, it's actually possible to run away. So it's not that much of a big difference at higher tiers, at at tier 5, because if they all have it. But at the lower tiers, especially when we look at stuff like the Centurion Mark III and the 76 Shermans, you definitely have a distinct advantage over your opponents. And we can see it with what people are playing right now. Hardly anyone is playing Germans. Now this might be down to my time period, or it may be down to the fact of other factors, such as people getting sick of getting bodied, because a lot of people have decided to play the RU-251 and don't know how to play it. But I will have a video coming up about that later on. But yeah, it is a pleasant surprise for me that the weapon stabilization has actually done a little bit more than I thought it would. And, you know, I just thought I'd commemorate it in a video. Hopefully next we get smoke, or reactive armor. Maybe not reactive armor. that may be a bit of an issue. But smoke, I think, is definitely the next step we're looking for. I mean, the weapon stabilization doesn't change the game that much. It changes it a little bit for a few certain vehicles, but it is a nice change. Whereas smoke, I think, would dramatically impact how ground forces is played, and I believe in a good way, as long as they don't limit it to like tier 5 or something like that. But anyway, we'll talk about it when that happens. For now, weapon stabilization, nice to see. I'll catch you next time.